Thanks for joining us for our Five Smooth Stones podcast. And we have a special guest with us today. I've known Nancy Wilson for quite a few years. And we have Nancy on for a series. We're going to do a six-part series on the church's ministry to special needs children, a special passion that Nancy has. So Nancy, tell us about how you got involved in the whole special needs world.
Well, I went to college at USC, and I became a teacher, and I thought, well, I need to go back and get a master's degree, so I decided to do that. And as part of it, I had to take a class on special needs. And so I did.
So when you got your original bachelor's degree, it was just in general education?
It was right after that.
And were you going to be you're going to be an elementary school teacher?
I was going to be an element,
plan?
Yep.
Okay.
That's what I was going to do.
Yeah.
And so the professor was a wonderful man. And after about 3 or 4 weeks, he said, you need to be a special ed teacher. And I said, oh, no. Those kids scare me. I wouldn't know what to do. So no, so leave me alone. And he kept at it. Every few weeks he'd ask me, so what do you think about that? And
would not take no for an answer.
Yeah. Well, and then we had to work for 6 weeks with somebody with a disability. And so I went what was then called the Crippled Children's Society. That's not what it's called there anymore. And I drove down to Watts every every week. And
it's like once a week you would go to?
Once a week. And I worked with this young girl who wasn't much younger than I was. And she was in a wheelchair. She could barely feed herself. She needed help with everything. But what I learned was that she was really bright and she was funny. And so I looked forward to meeting with her, and I would help her with her homework, and I would help her eat, and I would do all those things.
So can she communicate verbally?
Very haltingly.
Really?
Yeah. And so the last day I was there, I had really developed a love of her, for her, and I went to say goodbye, and she said she was already in bed, and which was unusual. And this is where I think God had a reason for this. And so she said, I have to go to the bathroom. And I said, oh, I'll go get a nurse. And so I looked all over the place, and there wasn't a nurse to be found anywhere. And so I went back in. I'm like, I don't know what to do. And I'm an only child, so I've never changed a diaper or anything. And I thought, okay, fine, I'll do this. And so I got out the bedpan and something that I had never done before. And so she did what she needed to do. And she started crying. And she kept saying, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Was she embarrassed or something?
Very embarrassed.
Oh.
And so upset that I would have to do that for her. And she didn't want me to have to do that because it made, she didn't want me to feel bad. And anyway, so as soon as she'd finished, I started to clean her up, and in walked 3 nurses. And I was like, okay, I get this. Okay, God, I get this. So I said goodbye to her, and I left and got in my car, and I absolutely fell apart. And I cried all the way home. And I realized that God was really telling me, you need to do this. So the next day I walked into the professor's office, and I said, you're absolutely right. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life because of that one girl that I met, and it was so impacting for me. So that's what I did, and I became a...
So you got your master's degree? And
I got my master's degree.
Was there a concentration or specialty in special needs work?
Actually, it was, the concentration was on autism.
Okay.
And that was right when, this is way back when things were people were just finding out about autism.
Trying to define it.
And what it was and what it looked like and all that sort of stuff. So that was...
So you got your degree, and then what happened?
Well, I went to work for kids with autism, and for the county of Orange County, and
Nancy's modest. I think you created the first autism program in the school district.
That was a little bit, yeah. Well, that's true. That was later, but that was, they asked me if I knew anything about autism, and I said, well, yeah, kind of, I do. And so they hired me on the spot, and I started the autism program for Irvine Unified.
So when you think about churches and ministering to children, and I know you have a passion for churches to have a ministry to children who have special needs. So talk about that. What have you seen in terms of the church's ministry to children like that?
Well, not a whole lot, let's put it that way. Some churches have a ministry. Our daughter's church has a really nice ministry in Irvine. But others, I've gone to pastors and said, hey, have you thought about this? And they, oh, we couldn't possibly do that. Or, oh, I just don't have time to do that. And and I get it. I understand it. But then I see the parents who, if their child has a disability, then it's like, well, you can't go to church. You have to go in with your child. And if you want him to be there. And so anyway, it's been very frustrating to me. But I think if people would give it a try, that they would see how much these kids have to offer typical peers and parents and teachers. And I really, really think that they would be surprised about how much they really would enjoy these children.
Well, I know the first church we served in together, where we met, they had a program for special needs kids. Mary Ford, I think, was the lady, remember her, that started it. And I remember there were people driving like 50 miles to come to church there, because it was one of the few churches in Southern California that had a special needs program. And then I also remember, it was so strange because I was really young, parents would drop the kids for the program, and then they would go to church, and they would have like these guilt episodes. They were so happy to have like an hour and a half in church where someone was, loving on their children, and then they felt guilty because they were so, relieved, and you can just tell the pressure. And I mean, parents feel that way. All parents feel pressure raising their kids, but there's a lot of challenges for parents, and churches need to develop some kind of ministry. All right. Well, one of the terms we hear a lot, those of us who aren't in the special field like you're in, is the term the spectrum.
The spectrum.
And I've heard this a lot. My wife even says it. I think they're on the spectrum. And so when somebody says the spectrum, could you explain, for those who are uninitiated like me, explain what the spectrum is, and how to, just sort of a general overview of that.
Okay. The spectrum really pertains to the autism, to kids with autism. That's where it came from. And so with children with autism, they can be very mild, have a very mild autism, or they can have a really more difficult. So anyway, what it is if your child is mild, they tend to be, you could probably put them into a class with typical peers, children who don't have autism, that's what they call our typical peers. And they would probably need a little support, but they wouldn't need a lot of support. And then you have kids who have severe autism. And those are the kind of kiddos that I had in school. And I mean, they can be tough cookies, but they also have a lot to give too. You just kind of have to know how to deal with them. For example, I had a girl in my class who I absolutely loved, Destiny, and very severe autism. And so every day we'd go up and I'd say, okay, put your picture up on the board so we know you're here. And so I said, okay, Destiny, it's your turn. And she's like, mm-mm. And I said, oh, come on, you can do this. All you have to do is go put your name in, and then you can go sit down. And so, stupid me, it was totally my fault. She came up and did that, and I said, well, now that you're here, why don't you put up the weather? And she looked at me like, whoa, wait a minute, that wasn't our deal. And she hit me really hard.
Oh, gosh.
And then I put my hand up, and
to defend yourself, kind of? Or
yep, and
dog?
broke my finger.
Oh, gosh.
Well, but it was actually kind of good because I had a cyst in my finger, and so they found out and took it out. So it's actually, but it was totally my fault. I asked her to do one thing, and I told her, you only have to do one thing, and I went back on it. And so those kids tend to be a little more, I don't know, picky about what they do, challenging.
So if you took a group of kids and watched them that were, kind of a cross section of kids with autism, could you evaluate and say, they're this place on the spectrum and this place, and literally like kind of slot them onto that spectrum somewhere? Are there like benchmarks kind of along the way?
Well, sort of, but I technically we can't do that because they have to be diagnosed by a doctor. However, yes, you can tell.
But what, a doctor, medical people would do that?
Absolutely.
Or psychologists or whatever?
Yeah, that's actually what our daughter does, is she takes these kids in. And
it was autism, but is that used now for just a wider, does the spectrum refer to kids who have Asperger's, different sorts of, or is it pretty much limited to autism?
Well, Asperger's
when you use the term the spectrum.
Okay, Asperger's is technically on the spectrum.
Okay.
And they don't use that term anymore.
Okay.
It's now just the autism spectrum.
Okay.
So, but you can tell. I mean, you can see these kiddos, and you can. Do they talk? If they don't have speech, or if they, have different things going on with them, you can tell pretty much. But we can't, as a teacher, I can't diagnose them. But I can certainly, talk to the parents and find out, oh, this is where they are, and this is how we're going to deal with it.
So I'm going to run and close the door. We can patch it up.
Why would you do that?
All right, if a children's worker's listening today and watching our podcast, if they, felt kind of tugged on in the heart by God to try and do something in their church in terms of developing a ministry to special needs children, what are some of the challenges that you've seen churches face as they're trying to carry on that kind of ministry work?
I think most of it comes from not knowing what it is, whether it's autism or any other thing, and it's sort of like, wow, I don't know what to do. And so I think that's where we can come in and say, all right, we can help you. We can, show you what to do, show you how to minister to these children. And, one may have this need and somebody may have that need, and they may be different, but we can deal with that and teach you how to work with them. And, yeah.
So ignorance is a factor. Are people, we were talking earlier, it seems like there's a bit of a fear issue too, where people are afraid, they don't know what to do, and it's kind of sort of the fear of the unknown. You don't really know how they're going to behave, how they're going to respond. So, you told me you've talked to pastors who are like, no, we don't want to, go down that road. And is fear part of it, do you think?
I think fear's a lot of it, because you don't want to make a mistake with the child.
Right.
And this is where the parents would come in too and say, all right, because I used to do this and say, all right, tell me about your child. Tell me about what do they love to do? Where are their challenges? How do you deal with it at home when your child is doing that? So it's kind of an intake form that I created, and so that we can really get to know the child. But we start with, what does your child like to do? What makes them happy? We want to make them happy too. We want for them to feel comfortable and welcomed.
So another issue I've noticed also is when we've traveled in East Africa and you hear things like, we asked a teacher there how many children she had in her Sunday school class. She didn't even pause, and she said 76. I'm like, well, how many people are helping you? And she said, no one. And we were, Marla was with me, who has a class of 25. She was, it was breathtaking. Then we found out that she also taught in a Christian school there, and she had like 60 kids in her class at school too. So I've noticed that churches that have a really effective special needs program have a lot of people. There's the ratio of leaders to children has to be, so that's got to be another kind of challenge, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Just getting people involved and equipping them. And then the facilities. You kind of have to have some special equipment, I think, don't you? Or maybe...
more than that, you have to be aware of I don't know, if a child's in a wheelchair.
Safety issues or
Yeah, and you can't just put things all around the room and expect
Right.
that child to be able to maneuver through there. So,
Right.
so we have talked about, oh, you need to make a clear pathway so children can, if they can't walk well or they're in a wheelchair, so they can get around and do things with their friends.
All right. Well, what is some encouragement you could give to a children's worker who's going to try to create a ministry to precious children like we're talking about? What would you say to encourage them?
To encourage them, I would say, it's so worth it. These children are made in the image of God, and they are wonderful, wonderful children. And yeah, they may act strangely, or they may throw things at you, or they may whatever, but you can get through to them. You just have to give it a try and help them know that you love them. I mean, I used to tell my kids that all the time because I did love them. They were weird as all get out sometimes, but they were wonderful, wonderful children. I think people would be so surprised at how much fun it is to work with those kids and how much you get from them, and particularly when you get the light goes on and they're like, oh wait, I know how to do this now, and it was like, yes, yay. So I just would encourage them that to give it a try. I mean, it may not be for everybody, but I think it's a little scary because you think, I don't know what's going to happen, but I think they would be amazed at how fun it is.
Well, I have this idea that in every church, there's people who don't think children's ministry is really all that important. Hate to say it. There's people who just don't care either way. That's probably the largest group. And then there's people in the church who have a real love for children and they want to have ministry to boys and girls. And every church has some people like that. I just have to believe that every church has somebody in it that's got a heart for children with special needs. And you got to find them and then launch them in ministry. So over the next 5 weeks, we're going to be talking about some really crucial principles in Deuteronomy chapter 6 that are bedrock, we think, in a great children's ministry. And we're going to talk with Nancy about how to integrate those principles into your ministry with special needs children. So we'll see you next week, and thank you for joining us.